A young mother, bleeding and shaking, clutching her crying daughter in the corner of a dim apartment. A fractured arm hanging at her side. A phone slipping from her fingers as she typed through tears. "Mom, he broke my arm." She thought she was sending it to the only person who'd ever protected her. But fate placed that message into the phone of the one man the world feared the most. A mafia boss who carried his own scars, his own ghosts, and a grief he could never outrun. He stared at the message and with a voice as cold as vengeance he replied, "Stay there. I'm coming." Not knowing her, not asking who she was, only knowing one thing: someone hurt her and someone would pay for it. That was the moment destiny shifted. The moment every life in this story changed direction. The moment a wrong number tied two broken hearts to the same unstoppable path. And it all began with a message meant for a mother but answered by a monster with a wounded heart. This was Kira. She wasn't an action hero or someone who ever expected to be hiding in the dark. But in this moment she was the only fortress her little world had. You could tell just by looking at her that she was exhausted. Her simple cotton shirt was torn near the shoulder, and a nasty streak of dried blood darkened the denim of her jeans just above the knee. Her brown eyes, usually warm and full of laughter, were wide and darting, reflecting the tiny sliver of moonlight filtering through a crack in the wall. Right next to her, tucked tight beneath the curve of her arm, was her daughter Mia. Mia was just 6 years old, a tiny quiet thing with a cascade of dark curly hair. Her face was smudged with dirt, but she held her favorite worn-out teddy bear like it was a shield. Mia wasn't crying, and that was the most heartbreaking thing of all. She was too scared to cry, listening to the silence outside their hiding spot, copying the unnatural stillness of her mother. Kira whispered simple, comforting nonsense into the child's hair, her voice barely a scrape of sound. They were cramped in what looked like the forgotten utility closet of an abandoned restaurant in a quiet part of town, the kind of place folks in Toronto or London or Miami drive past every day without noticing. It smelled of dust and old mop water, but it was solid, and right now solid was salvation. Kira's hand trembled as she pulled out her phone. The screen's glow was almost blinding in the absolute darkness. He had to be quick. Her mother, Amara, lived across town and needed to know they were in danger, but not where they were. Not yet. She went to her contacts, her thumb slipping slightly over the cracked screen. The text needed to be short, terrifying, and to the point. "Please, Mom. Call the police. He found us. Tell them about the storage unit, Building 7. I love you." It was the most important message of her life. She hit send, and then instantly put the phone on silent, sinking back into the shadows, the tiny vibration of the successful send feeling like a small explosion in the quiet. But in her haste, in her panic, she had done the unthinkable. Her mother's number and a contact labeled Damien, painter, were sitting right next to each other on the quick dial list. In the darkness, the contact labeled Amara Mom was missed. The text didn't go to her mother. It went to a man named Damien Moretti. If you were to see Damien Moretti, you wouldn't think painter. You'd think power. He was sitting in a penthouse office suite high above the lights of a busy North American city. Maybe New York, maybe Vancouver. A landscape of glass and ambition sprawling beneath him. He was a creature of immaculate tailoring and ruthless control. His hair was dark and always perfectly styled, and his eyes had a sharpness that could cut right through the small talk. Damien Moretti ran things. Big things. Things that required silence, discretion, and absolute loyalty. He was a man who handled millions before breakfast, and his schedule was planned down to the second. He was currently reviewing a complicated ledger. Nothing illegal, of course, just a set of numbers that needed understanding, when his personal encrypted phone buzzed once on the heavy mahogany desk. He didn't use this phone for business. It was for family and for the few personal contacts he kept, like the number he sometimes used when he needed to call in a specific crew for a quick remodeling job at one of his properties. That contact was labeled simply Damien, painter, a useful, harmless alias for the world to see. He glanced at the screen, expecting a confirmation about the renovation of his summer home. What he saw instead froze the calculated gears turning in his mind. From Kira, unknown number. "Please, Mom. Call the police. He found us. Tell them about the storage unit, Building 7. I love you." Damien stopped breathing. He read the text twice. It was frantic. It was desperate. The chilling phrase, "he found us," cut through his focus like a shard of ice. He didn't know Kira. He certainly wasn't anyone's mom. The phone number was new, but the sheer terror in those few words was unmistakable. It wasn't spam. It wasn't a joke. It was a cry for help. The ledger was instantly forgotten. He pushed the heavy chair back and stood up, his 6-foot-plus frame radiating a sudden, dangerous intensity. He was not a man who paused when action was required. His first thought wasn't confusion but efficiency. He was equipped to handle situations the police would never even touch. He grabbed his jacket, his keys, and paused only long enough to stab a reply back into the phone, the speed of his fingers betraying the urgency he felt. This is not your mom. Who is he? Send location now. Don't call the police. I am coming. He didn't wait for a response. He was already out the door, moving with a controlled rush that pulled his security detail into instant motion. He took the grand marble stairs 2 at a time, his expensive shoes making a sharp rhythmic sound that meant business. He barked orders into a headset, his voice a low, gravelly command. Trace the last known location of this number. I want the fastest vehicle available brought to the lobby in 30 seconds. Call Marco, tell him to stand by. And get me everything you can on a Building 7 storage unit in the East End. Damien knew he was driving into a mess that had nothing to do with him. He knew that for someone to be this terrified, the danger was probably something the police couldn't stop. But the raw, pure fear of a mother protecting her child had crossed his path. And once something crossed Damien Moretti's path, he owned it. He didn't know this woman Kira, but he knew one thing. He was the last best chance she had. Back in the utility closet, Kira's phone vibrated again, this time a sharp, terrifying buzz in her hand. She nearly dropped it. Who would text back so fast? She held her breath, opening the message with a shaking thumb, bracing herself for a threat. Instead she saw the words, "This is not your mom." Who is he? Send location now. Don't call the police. I am coming. Kira stared at it. It wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline. A strange, confusing, and alarming lifeline. The immediate, decisive command, "I am coming," somehow cut through the fog of her fear. It felt powerful. It felt fast. She didn't have time to process the bizarre mistake. She didn't have time to wonder who this stranger was who demanded she trust him over the police. Her only thought was action. She quickly tapped the button to share her location. A tiny digital pin dropped onto a map in the darkness. Out on the street, Damien's heavy black SUV peeled away from the curb, a monster engine roaring to life. He glanced down at the GPS. The pin was in a derelict section of the city, not far from a major highway. A perfect place for terrible things to happen unseen. Drive, he commanded the security driver, his jaw tight. And don't slow down. Kira and Mia were huddled in the silence, listening to the city outside. Kira had no idea who she had contacted, but for the first time in hours, a tiny, almost painful spark of hope flickered in her chest. Help was coming. Not the help she asked for, but help nonetheless. A dark, fast shadow was racing through the night toward her. A stranger who had chosen for some reason to answer a call not meant for him. Justice wasn't winning yet, but for the first time, maybe, just maybe, they were going to make it to sunrise. The silence inside the utility closet was violently broken by the squeal of tires outside. Kira froze, clutching Mia, ready to fight or scream, convinced the man who found them, her ex, the real threat, had finally arrived. But the sound that followed was the heavy thud of a vehicle door closing, and then a set of rapid, expensive footsteps. A moment later, the closet door, which Kira had barely managed to jam shut with a piece of wood, was ripped open. Not kicked in, not rattled, but simply pulled away with a terrifying lack of effort. Standing framed in the doorway, blocking the tiny sliver of moonlight, was Damien Moretti. He wasn't an angel. He looked like the kind of problem your mother warned you about, dressed in a flawless, dark suit, his face unreadable. But his eyes, scanning the closet, held a clinical intensity that wasn't aimed at hurting them. It was aimed at finding the threat. "No time," he said, his voice deep and entirely without warmth, like cold marble. "Move." Kira didn't argue. She couldn't. His authority was absolute, filling the small space. She gently lifted Mia, who was still silent but trembling violently, and stepped out into the night. The vehicle waiting was a powerful black SUV, running quietly at the curb. 2 large men, dressed just as sharply as Damien, were holding the rear door open. This wasn't a rescue. It was an extraction. As Damien guided Kira toward the vehicle, his gaze flicked down to her injured leg, then to the bruise forming high on Mia's cheekbone. He hadn't needed the police to tell him this was bad. The quiet desperation of this small family told the whole story. Who did this? Damien asked, his voice low enough that the nearby security guards couldn't hear. Kira, dizzy from the sudden movement and the adrenaline crash, could barely form the words. It was Ethan, Mia's father. He wasn't supposed to find us. Damien didn't look at her, instead focusing on a small engraved silver lighter that had fallen near the dumpster, just outside the closet door. It wasn't the kind of cheap disposable thing an ordinary man would use. Ethan? Damien asked, his eyebrow barely twitching. Ethan Caldwell? Kira nodded, stumbling as she was eased into the enormous back seat. You know him. Damien didn't answer right away. He slid in beside her, putting a deliberate distance between them. The silver lighter was now tucked into his jacket pocket. Drive, he instructed the driver. The downtown safe house. Maximum security. The drive felt like it lasted forever and only a minute. Kira watched the city lights flash by through the tinted window, still clutching Mia, who had finally fallen into a shallow, exhausted sleep on her chest. Kira felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She was safe, yes, but who was this man? He looked like he owned the city, he moved like a military commander, and the fact that he recognized her ex's name, Ethan Caldwell, sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. She was a mother, a receptionist who worked at a dental office. She did not have the kind of problems that warranted this kind of rescue. Why are you helping me? She finally whispered, her throat dry. I texted you by mistake. I don't know you. Damien finally turned to her. In the subtle lighting of the vehicle, his expression was colder than she had imagined. You're right. I don't know you, he said simply. But I know Ethan Caldwell. And I know the people he works for. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. That lighter outside your hiding spot? The crest on it belongs to a group we call the Vipers. They are a rival syndicate. They deal in things that are very messy and very permanent. I've been trying to find a clear link between Ethan Caldwell and their operations for months. Kira's world tilted. Syndicate? Rival? She thought Ethan was a cheating, manipulative fool who had lost their savings gambling. She had no idea he was tied to anything criminal, let alone something this organized and dangerous. He's just a bad guy, Kira stammered. He's not. Mafia. Damien gave a small, harsh laugh that held no humor. He is now. And because of him, you and your daughter are now a liability to me. He brought his war to my doorstep by mistake, and I don't tolerate messes. Kira felt her initial gratitude shatter. He wasn't helping out of kindness. He was protecting his own interests. She was a piece of information, a leverage point in a war she hadn't signed up for. The rescue suddenly felt like capture. We need to go to the police, she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. No, Damien said firmly. You won't go near the police. Not yet. They are too slow and Caldwell's reach is wider than you know. If the Vipers are involved, anyone in that precinct could be on their payroll. You're safer with me. Within minutes of arriving at the secure apartment, a place overlooking the city that felt enormous and isolating, Damien was back on the phone in the next room, his voice sharp and low. Kira watched Mia, who was finally asleep, tucked into a pristine white bed in a room that looked like it had never been touched by childish things. The windows were bulletproof, the doors were locked, and there was a heavy-set woman, silently introduced as Maria, sitting respectfully in the corner, holding a cup of warm tea for Kira. Kira's body finally surrendered. Her shoulders slumped, and the cup rattled slightly in her hand. She felt a profound, overwhelming sense of failure, exhaustion, and fear, all wrapped up in the dizzying relief of the soft mattress beneath her daughter. From the other room she could hear Damien's commands, not pleas but orders. I want everything on Ethan Caldwell, Damien was saying. Every call, every bank withdrawal, every contact he's made in the last 6 months. Focus on his movement after he found the mother and child. I want to know who is looking for them and where the Vipers are moving their assets. I want this done by morning. When Damien finally walked back into the living space, he looked straight at Kira. Her face was pale, drawn, and wet with silent tears. You and Mia are safe here, he stated, his voice slightly softer this time, acknowledging her distress. No one gets in without my knowledge. You will have everything you need. A doctor will be here to look at your knee shortly. Your job is to rest and say nothing. Kira looked at this powerful, terrifying man. He had saved her life, yet he had also stripped her of her choice. She was trapped in luxury, traded one dangerous man for another. Only this man was far more powerful. Thank you, she managed to choke out, though the words tasted like ashes. But I will not stay involved in whatever this is. Damien didn't argue. He simply gave a grim nod. He knew she was grateful for the safety but terrified of the price. As he turned to leave, shutting the heavy security door behind him, Kira looked back at Mia, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The deep, heavy exhaustion finally broke the dam of her fear. She knew this was all wrong, that she shouldn't trust him, that this was just the start of a new kind of trouble. But watching her little girl breathing evenly, her face smooth, safe from the monster outside, that was the only truth that mattered. Hope wasn't about the goodness of the person offering help. It was about the immediate, sweet reality of her daughter's security. They were alive. They were warm. And for this one terrifying night they were safe. Justice might be complicated, but love, for now, had won a momentary peace. The morning in the penthouse was silent, almost unnaturally so. Kira woke up to a soft, sterile light and the smell of expensive coffee, which was almost too jarring after the stink of dust and fear from the night before. Her first thought wasn't about her own safety but about her mother, Amara. Amara must have been awake all night, worried, sick, maybe already talking to the police. Kira slid carefully out of the comfortable bed, the pain in her knee duller now, thanks to the quick attention of Damien's silent doctor, and picked up her phone. She needed to fix the confusion she'd caused. She needed to tell her mother they were okay and to not call the police as the strange man had commanded. But as she powered the phone on, it flashed once, then died. She tried again. Nothing. The screen was cracked, and the frantic journey and sudden fall from the closet shelf must have done the rest. It was fried. Frustration welled up in her. Just one call. She tried plugging it into the charger she found, hoping for a miracle. As the screen briefly flickered back to life, she frantically went to the message thread. The list was short. An old message from her dentist, a promotional text, and then the thread. She hadn't been paying attention in the darkness, but now she saw it clearly. The contact name she had chosen was Damien, painter. Not Amara, mom. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The most important, terrifying text of her life, the one meant to save them, had been sent to a complete stranger because of a mistake. She hadn't just stumbled into a rescue, she had stumbled into the wrong life. A little while later, Damien walked into the living space. He wasn't dressed in his usual sharp suit, but in dark trousers and a simple, high-quality cashmere sweater. The attire of a man who didn't have to impress anyone, but simply existed with quiet authority. He didn't start with questions. He simply poured 2 cups of coffee. The approach was gentle, almost domestic, which only made Kira more suspicious. I need to know everything, he said, setting her cup down carefully. Not for police paperwork but for survival. Ethan Caldwell is a small problem, the people he works for are not. Kira nervously twisted the handle of her mug. The security of the room felt suffocating. I tried to call my mother. My phone is broken. I realize. I sent the text to the wrong person. Damien nodded slowly, confirming what he had already guessed. Your instinct was good, Kira. You called for help. Now tell me about Ethan. Why was he looking for you? She took a shaky breath. We separated 6 months ago. It was ugly. He has a temper. I took Mia and moved away. She paused, collecting herself. He started showing up. Not just outside the new apartment, but at the grocery store I only went to once. Then my spare keys went missing. I thought I'd dropped them. Stalking, Damien stated, his voice flat. Tell me about the escalation. The final straw was the flowers, Kira whispered, her eyes clouding with the memory. A few days ago. They were Mia's favorite rare pink orchids. He left them on the kitchen counter, inside the apartment. The locks hadn't been broken. That's when I knew he wasn't just watching me from the street. He was in the apartment, standing over my daughter while she slept. That's why we ran to that storage unit. We were desperate. As Kira spoke, describing the small, insidious clues, the missing keys, the silent intrusion, the terrifying message of the flowers, Damien wasn't just listening to a client. He was listening to an echo. He walked over to the massive window, his back to Kira, and stared out at the sprawling city. He was a man made of steel and strategy, but sometimes, a simple, awful memory could cut him. He remembered Sophia. It had been years ago, back when he was younger, before his power had become absolute. Sophia, his fiancée, was vibrant and smart, and she had ignored the unsettling things happening around her. The simple, unnerving things. A picture on her desk shifted. A window latch that she swore she had closed was left open. The sudden appearance of a package on her porch that she hadn't ordered. She had brushed it off as carelessness, just like Kira had brushed off the missing keys. Damien had been too busy, too focused on the rising tide of his business, too assured that he could protect her from anything big. He had missed the small, creeping danger. He had dismissed the subtle paranoia of a woman being hunted. The thought sent a cold, familiar dread slicing through him. Ethan Caldwell wasn't a gangster, he was a predator. And he was using the machinery of the Vipers to do his dirty work. Damien clenched his jaw. Sophia's tragedy had been a lesson burned into his soul. Don't ignore the small signs of a large threat. He turned back to Kira, his expression altered. The cold detachment was replaced by a heavy, focused gravity. He saw the tired, injured woman in front of him, and he saw Sophia's final, terrified face reflected in her eyes. "Kira," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I am going to tell you something you won't like. You cannot go back. Ethan is not looking for a family, he is looking for control. And he will hurt you to get it. He has demonstrated escalating behavior and access." He paused, gathering his words, and then spoke with a conviction that carried the weight of his painful past. "You said I shouldn't be involved in this. But now I am. This isn't just about the Vipers anymore. I lost someone years ago to exactly this kind of carelessness, the kind where you don't take the small, terrifying signs seriously enough." He walked closer, standing as a solid, unwavering presence. "I promise you this, I will not allow that to happen again. I will keep you and Mia safe. I will take down Ethan Caldwell and his entire network brick by brick. You may not trust me yet, but you need to trust my intent." Kira looked at him, recognizing the raw, almost desperate sincerity in his eyes. She saw the powerful man, yes, but she also saw a man haunted by loss. He had taken on her burden not for business, but because her terror had reawakened his own grief. It wasn't love, and it certainly wasn't justice yet, but it was a commitment born of profound understanding. As Damien walked away to make the necessary calls, leaving her with the promise of relentless protection, a new kind of relief washed over Kira. It was the hope that comes from finding a protector who understands the true nature of the shadow they are fighting. The past might leave painful clues, but today, those clues had earned her a powerful, unexpected ally. The morning had brought a heavy cloud of certainty over Kira. She was safe, yes, but she wasn't free. As she watched Mia play quietly with a new box of expensive and used building blocks provided by Damien's staff, the desire for her old, predictable life became overwhelming. Damien walked in to find Kira standing by the secure doorway, her arms crossed, a clear challenge in her posture. "I am grateful for everything," Kira began, trying to keep her voice steady, "but we need to go home. We need our things, my documents, Mia's favorite toys. I can't hide forever." Damien didn't even blink. He had anticipated this. "Kira, your apartment is no longer safe. Ethan knows you ran. He will expect you to go back. If you need anything, my people will fetch it." "No, you don't understand," she insisted. "I need to go myself. I need to feel normal. If I'm careful, I can go now before he realizes I'm missing." Damien sighed, a sound of restrained patience. "You're missing. He found the storage unit. He knows the timeline. He's furious. And I'm not waiting for him to decide your apartment is his next target." Kira tried one more time. "You promised to protect us. Let me go home even just for an hour with your men. I need my life back." He simply pulled out his phone, giving up the argument. "Fine. You need proof, then I will give you proof." He made a quick call to his security chief. "Send a retrieval team to Kira's apartment. I want photographs. And be careful, I suspect they've been there already." The wait was agonizing. Kira paced the plush carpet while Mia, oblivious, stacked bright plastic blocks into a magnificent if wobbly tower. After an hour that felt like a lifetime, the secure phone on Damien's desk buzzed. He put the call on speaker, and the security chief's voice, rough and professional, filled the room. Boss, the place is destroyed. Looks like they ripped it apart looking for something specific. Maybe the storage unit receipt or documents. They didn't take anything valuable, just documentation. Kira gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Her small, humble apartment violated. And the other issue, boss, the chief continued, his voice dropping slightly, they left their calling card. Painted a large dark green viper coiled on the living room wall, right over the fireplace. Clear message. They know she was there. Damien looked directly at Kira, his expression grim and unwavering. He didn't need to say a word. The air itself confirmed the danger. Ethan hadn't just looked for her. He had claimed the apartment as part of his war. Understood, Damien said calmly, cutting the call. Return to base. He turned to Kira, the end of the conversation clear. Your home is compromised. It's a battlefield now. You are not going back. Kira's eyes filled with sudden, helpless tears. The reality was heavy. She was homeless. She was hunted. I can't stay here, she whispered, her voice tight with shame and frustration. I can't be this liability. Damien approached her but stopped a few feet away, respecting her space. It's not up for debate. The safe house is good, but it's temporary and easily compromised for long-term stays. I am moving you to my estate. It is the most secure place I own. You and Mia will stay there until Caldwell and the Vipers are eradicated. The mention of the estate made her head spin. A liability was one thing. Moving into a man's home, a man she barely knew, a man who dealt with crime syndicates, was entirely another. The move happened quickly. The drive took them outside the city limits, past suburbs that looked like picture books, and finally through towering iron gates and up a long, winding, secluded driveway. Damien's mansion wasn't just big. It was enormous. It sat on acres of land like a fortress, quiet and majestic. Inside, everything was high ceilings, polished wood, and hushed elegance. It felt less like a home and more like a high-end museum. Kira felt smaller than ever. She led Mia up a grand staircase, a whirlwind of fear, gratitude, and boiling resentment. She felt trapped in a gilded cage. Damien had given them a huge wing of the house, beautiful and private. As he stood in the doorway, giving the final instruction to the housekeeper, that Kira and Mia were to have anything they wished, Kira seized a moment of privacy with her daughter, thinking he had left the room. She kneeled down next to Mia, pulling her into a tight hug. Mommy hates this, she muttered quietly into Mia's hair, her voice thick with emotion. It's too quiet and it's too big and I feel like an alien. Mia patted her back gently. But the room has a balcony, Mommy. I know, baby, but we can't go anywhere. We're stuck here with that ice sculpture of a man. He's so stiff and serious he probably doesn't even know how to laugh, Kira vented, relieved to release some tension, not realizing how clearly her voice carried in the silent, vaulted hallway. He treats us like we're valuable packages, not people. I swear he's probably got gears where his heart should be. She stood up, wiping her eyes, and turned, only to find Damien standing not 10 feet away in the middle of the doorway. He hadn't left. He had heard everything. His face was completely neutral, but there was a flicker, a brief shadow of something. Hurt? Awkwardness? Embarrassment? That crossed his usually unreadable features. I apologize if my methods are too mechanical, Kira, Damien said, his voice flat but carrying a strange dry hint of irony. But those gears are focused entirely on keeping you and your valuable package safe from men who would hurt you. Kira's face went scarlet. The wave of embarrassment was instantly crippling. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Mr. Moretti, I didn't realize you were still here. I was just venting, he finished for her. He gave a single, curt nod, ignoring her burning face. I understand. Try to get some rest. Maria will bring dinner. He turned and walked away, his stride still controlled but somehow less robotic. Kira watched him go, mortified, but her embarrassment was quickly replaced by a reluctant relief. He was infuriatingly controlling, yes, but he had taken her worst insult and handled it with the same quiet efficiency he handled everything else. She looked down at Mia, who was beaming, perfectly happy in her new, safe fortress. Mia looked up at her mother. It's a really big place, Mommy. And the man has good blocks. Kira managed a small, genuine smile. Her life was upside down. She had just called her incredibly powerful rescuer an emotionless robot to his face. and she was now living in a gold cage. But looking at her daughter, safe, clean, and happy despite everything, that was the positive focus. They were breathing. They were protected. She had unintentionally found a protector whose commitment was absolute, even if his personality was like a block of ice. And that commitment, however stiff, was a beacon of hope in the deep, dark mess of her life. The great, silent house was starting to feel normal, which was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. Kira and Mia were spending the afternoon in the mansion's vast library, a room lined with books that smelled of leather and age. Kira was trying to read, but her eyes kept drifting to Mia, who was sketching intently at a low table. Mia had been silent about the events of the last few days, seemingly processing the trauma with the strange, deep focus only a child can muster. Damien walked into the room not to command but simply to check in, a routine he had established that Kira was starting to resent, yet depend on. He leaned against the polished oak doorframe watching them both. Mia, looking up from her drawing, tilted her head at Damien. "Mr. Damien?" "Yes, Mia?" he replied, his voice still measured but softening slightly for the child. "Are the bad men going to come here?" she asked, her simple, direct question striking the quiet room like a physical shockwave. Kira's heart lurched. She immediately moved to comfort her daughter, trying to deflect. "No, sweetie. This place is super safe. Mr. Damien's men are like superheroes, remember? They won't let anyone near." Damien didn't contradict her, but his gaze remained fixed on the little girl. Mia tapped her pencil against the paper. "One of the men had a face like this," she said, scrunching up her face to demonstrate the uncomfortable look of a mask. "But I saw him before." "Not masked." Kira felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Saw him where, sweetie?" Mia pointed to the figure she had drawn. A simple stick man with very distinct, shiny black boots and a bright yellow raincoat. "At my school. Weeks ago." The air in the library seemed to freeze. Weeks ago. Before the flowers, before the missing keys, before the run to the storage unit. Kira looked up at Damien, whose eyes had narrowed to slits. The cold, assessing focus was back, heavier than ever. "Tell me about the man, Mia," Damien commanded gently, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward the table. Mia, comfortable with the attention, elaborated simply. "He wasn't wearing the mask that day. He had dark hair and he stood by the big gate. He was talking to the lady who sells ice cream. And he had those shoes." She tapped the shiny boots on her drawing. "Shiny. Like new." Damien knelt down, placing himself at Mia's eye level. He didn't ask about clothes or height. He went straight for the detail she offered. "What kind of shoes, Mia? Leather? Rubber?" "No, silly," Mia said, finally smiling a little. "They were shiny like Mom's good boots but dark." He kept looking over the fence at the kids during recess. The innocent revelation hammered home the horrific truth. This wasn't an impulsive act of revenge by Ethan. This was premeditated. Ethan hadn't just used the Vipers for muscle. He had instructed them to stalk his daughter at her school. It was a planned targeting, a professional operation. "They were there for her," Kira whispered, her voice cracking, her terror spiking to a new level. The thought of a dangerous stranger watching her daughter during recess made the safe house, the mansion and Damien's protection all feel suddenly inadequate. Damien stood up, his face a mask of cold fury, but his focus was razor sharp. "It's not a coincidence, Kira. They were tracing your movement through Mia. They were establishing a pattern. Ethan was giving them intel and they were preparing their approach." He quickly moved to the secure phone on a nearby desk and spoke rapidly to his chief of operations. "Rethink all protection details. The Vipers are operating with advanced intel and preparation. They were scouting the child's school weeks ago. I want every connection Ethan Caldwell has to the school. Teacher contact, parent roster, utility bills. Analyzed. Now." Kira felt a sickening wave of dizziness. She was no longer dealing with a disgruntled ex-partner. She was dealing with a professional criminal enterprise that had already penetrated the one place she thought was untouchable, Mia's school. She stumbled back toward the sofa, her knees weak. Her fear was so immense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. "They were watching her," she repeated, tears streaming down her face. "Weeks ago. And I didn't see it. I didn't protect her." Damien approached her, and for the first time since their terrifying meeting, he didn't feel like a block of ice. He felt like the one solid thing in a world that had suddenly dissolved into chaos. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He offered control. You didn't see it because it was meant to be invisible, he said, his voice low and firm. You are safe now. This tells me one thing. Ethan is terrified of losing her and he is using high-level leverage to force your return. It confirms my decision to keep you contained here. Kira looked up at him, her eyes red and frantic. She saw the full scope of the danger, a danger she was entirely unprepared to face. Her initial resentment over his controlling nature evaporated instantly. His controlling nature was the only thing standing between Mia and the Vipers. Damien, she whispered, using his first name without thinking, a sign of her complete surrender to the moment. You have to promise me. You have to stop them. Whatever you need, whatever you think is necessary. Please. Don't let them hurt her. This was the moment of full, if terrified, trust. Kira placed her life, her daughter's life, into the hands of the very dark, powerful man she had only just called an ice sculpture. She didn't trust his heart, but she trusted his capability and his commitment to protection. Damien met her gaze, his expression softening only marginally, but conveying absolute sincerity. I already promised. The difference now is I know how long they have been watching. That makes them dangerous, but it also gives us a clear goal. We stop them, Kira. No matter the cost. The room was filled with the silent agreement of two people bound by a sudden, terrifying purpose. Kira was no longer trapped. She was protected by a fortress of steel and grief. The fear was immense, but the hope was equally powerful. She had given her trust to the one person in the world equipped to fight this invisible, premeditated war. Love was still winning because it now had the deadliest possible ally. The basement of Damien's primary operations center was not a place built for comfort. It was built for information. It was cold, clean, and silent, a stark contrast to the luxurious warmth of the mansion where Kira and Mia were waiting. In a small, windowless room, Damien stood over a man, one of the Viper's foot soldiers his crew had managed to capture during a scouting attempt near Kira's abandoned apartment. The man was rough, bruised, and clearly terrified of the man standing over him. Damien wasn't shouting. He rarely did. His questions were delivered with the calm precision of a surgeon cutting flesh. Ethan Caldwell hired you to find the woman Kira and the girl Mia, Damien stated, his voice low. Why the extreme level of preparation? Why the advanced scouting at the school? The gang member, whose name was Leon, spat on the concrete floor. He said he just wanted his kid back. It was a standard snatch and grab. High price, easy job. Lies, Damien countered, his eyes drilling into the man. The Vipers don't take risks for domestic disputes. This operation was too complex. You ransacked the apartment looking for specific documents. Tell me what they were. Leon stayed silent, but his eyes darted away, a tiny, revealing tremor of fear running through his body. Damien leaned closer, his shadow falling over the captive. You brought a personal war to my city. That is a mistake I do not forgive. Tell me the truth and I may allow you to live. Under the sheer, suffocating weight of Damien's presence, the man finally broke, his voice a ragged whisper. It wasn't just Caldwell, all right? Our boss, the Viper leader, he took the job seriously after Caldwell told him about the woman. Caldwell was raving, saying she wasn't just trying to hide. He said she was dangerous because... Leon swallowed hard, glancing nervously toward the doorway. She remembers something she shouldn't. The words hung in the cold air, striking Damien with the force of a physical blow. He straightened up immediately, all traces of cold patience gone, replaced by sudden, deadly concern. Remembers what? Damien demanded, his voice suddenly sharp. What did she see? What does the Viper boss think she knows? Leon shook his head vehemently. I don't know. Just that she remembers something. That the goal changed from retrieval to permanent silencing. She was supposed to disappear. A short time later, Damien was back at the mansion. He hadn't told Kira about the interrogation, but he needed to confirm the startling new angle. He found her in the private sitting room helping Mia with a massive jigsaw puzzle. Kira, he said, keeping his tone calm. I need you to think very carefully. Is there anything at all, that you might have seen, heard, or witnessed maybe weeks or months ago that seems strange? A car accident? A meeting? Something that has nothing to do with Ethan? Kira immediately looked up, confused by his intense gaze. Her trembling returned, a physical manifestation of her fear. "I don't understand." "Why?" she asked, her hand instinctively pulling Mia closer. Damien chose his words carefully. "Because I have reason to believe that the attack on you is not just about Ethan getting his daughter back. It's about what you might unknowingly remember. They think you are a witness to something important that would threaten the Vipers." Kira's face went white. She shook her head, tears forming instantly in her eyes. "No. That's insane, Damien. I'm nobody. I work at a dentist's office. I don't go anywhere. I haven't seen anything. I haven't left my neighborhood since I moved. You have to believe me. I have no idea what they're talking about." Her denial was absolute, panicked, and entirely genuine. She was telling the truth as she knew it. This only deepened the mystery. If Kira didn't know what she remembered, how could they protect her from a threat based on a secret buried deep in her own mind? The interrogation and Kira's genuine confusion confirmed the terrifying new reality. Kira was a target, not a pawn. But as Damien stood on the periphery of his primary operations room later that evening, reviewing the security footage of the captured gang member, a far more unsettling threat emerged. Marco was Damien's most trusted friend, his loyal lieutenant for 2 decades, the one man Damien would trust with his life, and he had been entirely silent about the capture. Marco was the one who oversaw the physical security of the mansion and the day-to-day operations. Damien watched the footage of the interrogation again, focusing not on the captured man, but on Marco, who had been standing guard outside the door. When Leon, the captive, had whispered that chilling line, "she remembers something she shouldn't." Marco's reaction on the security feed was odd. He didn't flinch, didn't look startled, but instead, subtly glanced at the wall clock, an act of strange detachment. And then moments later he made a quick, muffled phone call in a secluded corner, away from the audio pickup. A call that wasn't logged on the official records. Damien felt the cold steel of betrayal curl in his stomach. Marco had been acting strangely all week. Slow to relay information about the Vipers, oddly hesitant when Damien asked for a full list of Ethan Caldwell's associates. Damien had dismissed it as stress. Now it looked like something far darker. He walked into his office, the lavish room now feeling less like a command center and more like a potential trap. He picked up his personal, secure phone. He needed to confirm his suspicions, but he couldn't afford to be wrong. If Marco, his most trusted ally, was compromised, the threat was already inside the gate, and Kira's safety was utterly dependent on one man who couldn't trust his own shadow. This new threat, the internal one, was infinitely more dangerous than the Vipers. Damien walked back towards Kira's wing of the mansion. He found her asleep next to Mia, curled protectively around her daughter. He looked down at the woman who insisted she knew nothing, yet held the key to a conspiracy within her own mind, and he looked at the danger now closing in from his own trusted circle. He was entirely alone, but his resolve was unbreakable. He gently covered Kira with a blanket, his heart hardened by the betrayal he suspected. She was confused and terrified, but she had trusted him. And now he had to be her shield against everything. A criminal conspiracy, a painful memory, and the sudden awful sting of betrayal. The mystery was terrifying, but the promise he had made was solid. He would uncover the truth, protect Kira, and ensure that justice, even this dark, violent kind, would prevail. The great house had endless hallways, and some of them held secrets even Damien couldn't entirely lock away. On the wall of a quiet, sunlit corridor near his study, among framed awards and obscure antique maps, hung a single simple photograph that didn't fit with the rest of the cold grandeur. Kira found herself drawn to it. She had been wandering the enormous house, feeling restless and confined when she came across the picture. It was a photo of a young woman, maybe late 20s, with bright, laughing eyes and vibrant dark hair. She was beautiful, dressed simply, standing by a quiet beach. Kira stared at the woman's face, feeling a vague, nagging familiarity. She felt like she should know her but couldn't place it. She didn't hear Damien approach. He was a man accustomed to silence. "She looks familiar, doesn't she?" Damien's voice was soft, devoid of his usual commanding edge. Kira jumped, turning quickly. "Mr. Moretti, I mean Damien. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be wandering." "It's fine," he said, walking to stand beside her, gazing at the photo. "That's Sophia. She was my fiancée." He spoke the word fiancée with a raw, careful tenderness. He finally looked away from the photo and directly at Kira, recognizing her situation as the same terrifying path Sophia had walked. You asked me why I'm involved, why I took you in even after I realized I knew nothing about you, he began, his voice low, confessions spilling out after years of being locked away. You reminded me of her. Of the small things. He leaned against the wall, dropping his guarded posture. Sophia was trying to leave a very dangerous situation. She was terrified. She was being watched. Just like you, she dismissed the small, terrifying signs. The moved objects, the missing pieces of mail. Damien paused, the memory clearly painful. I told her I would protect her. I told her I would take care of it, that she was safe in my house. But I was arrogant. I was focused on the external threats, the big business rivals. I never saw the one right under our noses. The stalking. He killed her, Kira realized, the statement not a question but a quiet, awful truth. Yes, Damien confirmed. He caught up to her. And I was too late. I swore that when I saw that kind of escalating fear again I would not fail. That's why I'm here. That's why I am obsessed with finding out what you remember. I have to stop history from repeating itself. Kira stood there, listening to the broken confession of the man she had called an ice sculpture. Her fear was momentarily overshadowed by a profound, shared empathy. She realized that Damien wasn't cold, he was shattered. And then, as she looked back at Sophia's beautiful, haunting face, the pieces of the puzzle Mia had unintentionally started finally clicked into place. The name, Sophia, the date of the tragedy that Damien mentioned, and the specific kind of help she had needed. The help, Kira whispered, her eyes wide. She was trying to leave a situation. Did she ever go to a shelter? For women escaping domestic violence. Damien looked at her, surprised. Yes. Just briefly before she came back to me. She was trying to secure legal documents and some financial independence first. How do you know that? Kira slowly brought her hands up to cover her mouth, the air suddenly too thin. The nagging familiarity of Sophia's face was suddenly terrifyingly clear. That's where I worked, Kira stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. Before I got the dental receptionist job. It was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I worked the intake desk for a while at the Havenwood shelter. She looked back at the photo of Sophia, her eyes fixed on the vibrant smile that hid so much pain. I remember seeing her file. Sophia. A young woman, scared, trying to leave a powerful man who was also incredibly possessive. I remember the notes from the head counselor saying she was dealing with a very sophisticated stalker and needed a quick, safe transition. Kira had never linked the heartbroken woman she read about in the files to the powerful man who saved her life. She was just another kind face on the long list of victims. I never met her personally, I don't think, Kira explained, scrambling to gather the memories. But I saw the file. I handled the intake paperwork, the confidentiality agreements, the notes about the financial aid and the legal separation details. The dates, Damien. The dates line up. Damien stared at her, the blood draining from his face. The air in the corridor was suddenly thick with the weight of destiny. You didn't see an accident, he stated, his voice barely audible. You didn't witness a meeting. You were the gatekeeper to the very secret Sophia was trying to protect. The pieces slammed together with brutal clarity. Kira had handled the sensitive, confidential records pertaining to Sophia's escape. Records that would have detailed the extent of the stalking, the names involved, perhaps even the financial connections that tied Sophia's stalker to the Vipers. Kira hadn't seen something she shouldn't. She had read something she shouldn't, information that could now compromise the people who hurt Sophia. Damien's initial conviction, born of grief, now sharpened into terrifying certainty. Ethan Caldwell is working for the Vipers. He found you because he knows you worked at the shelter. He's looking for the records. You don't remember the details because you handled dozens of files, but the Vipers are convinced that you are the last best link to those specific records. They're not trying to silence what I saw, Kira whispered, tears of profound realization falling. They're trying to destroy what I know how to find. The terrible, heartbreaking overlap of their histories was finally revealed. Damien's vengeance and Kira's survival were tied together by a tragedy that happened 7 years ago. Damien reached out, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder, the first non-clinical touch between them. Your past holds the key to everything, Kira. Not just your survival but to the justice Sophia deserves. For Kira, The profound terror of knowing she held a key to a devastating secret was instantly counterbalanced by the hope of avenging the woman whose tragedy now defined her survival. Justice for Sophia meant justice for Mia. The shared secret had bound them together, transforming their desperate pairing into an unbreakable, purposeful alliance fueled by love and a common enemy. The quiet safety of the mansion was brutally interrupted one afternoon. The atmosphere in the secure drawing room had been calm. Kira was sketching with Mia, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Then the security alarm chimed once, indicating an authorized arrival, followed quickly by the heavy tread of unfamiliar shoes. Detective Thomas Rourke of the city police force stood in the doorway. He wasn't invited, but he wasn't detained either. Damien had instructed his staff to cooperate fully with any law enforcement request, which was a strategic move to project legitimacy. Rourke was a large man, dressed in a decent, slightly rumpled suit, with eyes that had seen too much of the city's underbelly. Rourke didn't look at Mia. He looked straight at Kira, and his gaze was aggressive. "Miss Kira Davis?" he stated, his voice loud and accusatory in the hushed room. "I need to ask you some questions about your ex-partner Ethan Caldwell, and the missing person reports filed by your mother, Amara." Kira instinctively placed her hand on Mia's shoulder. "My mother is safe and I am here voluntarily, Detective. My lawyer will be happy to speak with you." Rourke gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Lawyer? Right. You're in a house owned by Damien Moretti, Ms. Davis. Let's drop the nonsense. You think you're safe, but you're just trading one cage for another. The police want to help you, he wants to use you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense warning meant only for Kira. "Moretti is a known figure, Ms. Davis. He deals in power, not protection. The kind of people he runs with? They don't save people. They acquire assets. Your life might be collateral damage in his next business transaction. Get out of here. Work with us. We can put you in a proper protection program." Kira felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The police, the supposed good guys, were telling her the man who saved her was a monster. She was overwhelmed, and for a terrifying moment the simplicity of legal protection, a government program, a badge, seemed incredibly tempting. "What exactly do you think I know, Detective?" Kira asked, trembling slightly. "I've told you I only worked at a shelter. I don't know anything about syndicates." "That shelter," Rourke pressed, "it's been linked to an old investigation involving money laundering that went cold years ago. Maybe you saw a face, maybe you handled a document, but you are the key to unlocking something he," Rourke gestured back toward the hallway, "wants for his own reasons. You trust him, you're dead." It was at that exact moment, just as Rourke's relentless pressure was finally starting to erode Kira's fragile resolve, that Damien walked into the room. He didn't make a sound, but his presence was a chilling force. The air instantly thickened. "I believe the interview is over, Detective Rourke," Damien said, his voice flat and lethal. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. He simply oozed authority. Rourke turned slowly, a hostile smirk fixed on his face. "Mr. Moretti, I was just advising Ms. Davis of her options, namely staying away from known criminal associates and cooperating with the police." "And I," Damien countered, stepping closer, closing the distance between them, "am advising Ms. Davis to stay exactly where she is, under my protection, safe from the people your department clearly can't touch." The confrontation was raw, sparking with the rivalry between the two powerful men, both fighting for the right to protect, or control, Kira. "She is a material witness, Moretti," Rourke growled. "You're obstructing an investigation. I am protecting a terrified mother from a rival syndicate using law enforcement incompetence as their shield." Damien shot back, his eyes flashing with the clear threat of power. "You want to talk to her, you bring a warrant and my lawyer. Until then you are trespassing." Rourke held Damien's stare for a long, tense moment. He knew he was beaten for now. Damien had played the legal game perfectly. He picked up his bag, glaring at Kira one last time. "Think about what I said, Ms. Davis," Rourke warned. "The law might be slow, but it's cleaner than the man you're currently hiding behind." With one final, disgusted look at Damien, Detective Rourke left, the silence he left behind feeling louder than his interrogation. Kira was shaking. She was pulled between Rourke's plausible caution and Damien's absolute, undeniable capability. Damien waited until the doors had truly shut, sealing them back into the fortress. He walked over and gently touched her shoulder, a gesture that was now becoming more frequent, though still tentative. "He's right about one thing," Damien murmured. "I am dangerous. But I am not dangerous to you." Kira managed a shaky breath. "He made sense, Damien. He said I was an asset to you. He said you were using me." Damien didn't deny the asset part. He simply focused on the core emotion. "You can't trust the police, Kira. Not yet. They are too slow, too predictable, and too compromised. I know Rourke. He's decent, but he thinks in straight lines. We are in a war that requires shadows." But later that night, as Damien sat alone in his study, he found himself consumed by a different emotion. He wasn't angry at Rourke, he was angry at himself. He kept replaying the moment Rourke left, watching Kira's face. She had looked at the detective, a man of clear, defined law, however aggressive, with a look of longing. A longing for normalcy. It wasn't just Rourke he was jealous of. It was the easy trust a simple badge could inspire. Kira's fear was a badge of honor he wore, but he knew he could never give her that feeling of safe, lawful order. He was the dark option, the last resort. "He thought I had gears where my heart should be," he recalled, the memory stinging. The realization was potent. He had dedicated his life and his power to protecting her, but he was jealous that she found the concept of another man, a detective, a clean man, easier to trust. It was an entirely human, vulnerable feeling that threatened to shatter his control. He cared for her deeply. He cared more than he should. This jealousy, born not of possession but of a painful desire for her genuine faith, only solidified his resolve. If he couldn't win her trust through lawfulness, he would win it through justice. He would eradicate the Vipers and Ethan Caldwell so completely that Kira would have no choice but to recognize his victory as the only true salvation. Hope, even if it came from a dark place, was all he had to offer, and his jealousy only made that offering fiercer. Safety is a lie until the moment it becomes real. And the quiet of the mansion shattered just after midnight. Kira woke to a sound that was far worse than shouting, the muffled metallic thunk of heavy objects colliding somewhere far too close. Then came the high-pitched, insistent chirp of a secondary alarm, followed by the deep roar of men giving sharp, urgent orders. She sprang out of bed, grabbing Mia, who woke instantly, terrified. "Mommy, what is that?" "Shh, baby. It's okay. Just stay behind me," Kira whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was terrified, but her reaction wasn't to hide under the bed. It was to move toward the secure door, the one she knew led into Damien's corridor. She trusted the fortress and the man who commanded it. She didn't have to wait long. The sounds of fighting were sudden and brief, followed by a heavy, rushing silence. Moments later, the heavy oak door burst open and Damien stood there, framed by the light from the hallway. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was in dark tactical gear, his face grim, radiating lethal readiness. "Get up. Now," he commanded, his voice tight. Kira didn't question. She swept Mia into her arms and ran to him. As they passed out of the private wing and into the corridor, they saw the aftermath. 2 unconscious men in dark clothes sprawled near a service stairwell, quickly being secured by Damien's security team. "They bypassed the perimeter sensors," Damien was saying into his headset, his gaze sharp and sweeping. "They used the old utility tunnel access. That tunnel hasn't been used in 5 years." He led Kira and Mia to a deeper, more secure room, placing them behind a barricaded door with one of his most trusted guards. He looked at Kira, his eyes blazing with fury. "It was an attempt to take you," he stated simply, locking the door. They were silent. Professional. But they knew the layout too well. The investigation started immediately. By the time the sun began to paint the sky a weary gray, Damien was in his office, reviewing security footage and schematics of the mansion's complex security system. The facts were cold and undeniable. The attackers had bypassed the main perimeter alarm by cutting power to a secondary fence, a fence only internal staff knew was still linked to the primary system. They used a specific code to disarm the motion sensors in the West Wing service corridor. A code that was changed only once a year, and only 3 men in the entire organization knew the current sequence. Damien, his security chief, and Marco. Most damningly, the attackers used the defunct utility tunnel as their point of entry. A tunnel that appeared sealed on all public and routine internal blueprints, but whose existence and secret maintenance access was only known to the men who had been with Damien for decades. Chief among them, Marco. Damien sat back in his chair, the the victory of securing Kira fading beneath the devastating realization. This wasn't a lucky attack by the Vipers. This was a planned breach facilitated by an intimate knowledge of his home and defenses. The initial suspicion he had felt after the interrogation of the gang member now solidified into a terrifying, painful certainty. Marco, Damien whispered the name aloud, a taste of ash and betrayal in his mouth. Marco wasn't just his employee. He was the one man who had stood by Damien through the blood, the grief, and the building of his entire empire. He was the one man Damien had trusted implicitly with his life, his business, and now Kira's safety. The betrayal was more than just a security leak. It was a personal devastation. It meant the man Damien relied on for protection was the very person handing their details over to the enemy. It meant the internal weakness was the friend he had grieved with over Sophia's death. Later that morning, Marco arrived at the mansion looking stressed and apologetic. He started offering theories about the attack. A weakness in the new system, a lapse in perimeter checks. Damien watched him, his face impassive, his ice sculpture exterior back in full force, but colder than ever. The attackers knew the tunnel access, Marco, Damien stated, his voice devoid of emotion. They used the secondary code to disarm the West Wing corridor. Only 3 of us knew that code. Marco swallowed hard, his face pale. Perhaps the code was compromised, boss. We used it a few months ago for the renovations, maybe one of the contractors. No, Damien cut him off, finality ringing in the single word. You were hesitant to give me a full rundown on Caldwell's associates last week. You made an unlogged call after the interrogation of the Viper operative. He looked at his friend, his closest ally, with a gaze of profound disappointment. They knew where Kira was sleeping, Marco. They knew which wing of the house to hit. I built this house and I designed the security. Only one man outside of myself had the necessary information to pull this off. Marco didn't confess. He didn't have to. The shame and guilt in his eyes were all the confirmation Damien needed. Back in the secure room, Kira was still shaken, but she was alive. She watched Mia finally drift off to sleep, exhausted by the terror. When Damien returned, his manner was different. He was quieter, harder, and entirely focused. He stood by the window, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the betrayal. The attack failed, he told her, his voice low. But it confirmed our worst fear. It was an inside job. The threat isn't just external anymore. It's coming from within my own operation. Kira immediately grasped the implications. She looked at the man who had just risked his life to save her from his own people. Her fear was immense, but it was channeled into an absolute, unwavering trust in her protector. Her hand reached out, tentatively touching his arm. It will be okay, she said, offering the only comfort she had. You will fix this. I know you will. Damien looked at her, seeing not the naive woman he rescued, but the partner who had survived a terrifying night. The betrayal had hurt him, but it had also clarified his mission. He had lost his friend, but he had solidified his purpose. The discovery of the traitor meant the greatest threat was now known, and that was the true source of hope. Justice for both Sophia and Kira would now begin with the painful cleansing of his own house. The pain of Marco's betrayal was now harnessed, turned into cold, precise energy by Damien. He had locked down the mansion, secured Kira and Mia in the deepest core of the house, and immediately went to work dissecting the evidence he had recovered from Marco's seized accounts. A hidden, encrypted file he called the Black Ledger. This ledger wasn't just proof of Marco's double-dealing with the Vipers. It was a roadmap of their criminal activities. Damien spent hours staring at the raw data, the names and numbers blurring together until one pattern finally emerged. In the middle of dozens of suspicious transfers for security consulting and logistic services, were recurring, smaller payments funneled through an entirely legitimate front. The payments were labeled donations for community outreach. Damien cross-referenced the legitimate shell company. It was a non-profit organization, a small local charity focused on providing resources to vulnerable women. The name of the charity hit him like a hammer: the Havenwood Support Fund. Damien immediately pulled up Kira's background details. She used to work at a shelter, the file confirmed. The Havenwood shelter years ago. He looked from the ledger, proof of a deep criminal money trail, to Kira's past. Marco's betrayal, the Viper's threats, Ethan Caldwell's desperation. and the death of Sophia were all converging on one location and one person. It wasn't just a place of employment, Damien murmured to his empty office. It was the source of the leak. He brought the information to Kira in the secure den. She was still rattled from the kidnapping attempt, but her fear was now sharpened by focus. Kira, look at this, Damien instructed, pointing to the transactions on a secured tablet. The money trail for the Vipers leads directly to a charity called Havenwood, where you volunteered. Kira leaned closer, her eyes scanning the familiar name. Havenwood. I told you I only handled the intake paperwork. I left years ago. I haven't even thought about that place. But someone there was compromised, Damien pressed. Someone was passing information to the Vipers for years, likely using the donations as a bribe. They leaked Sophia's attempt to escape, and they eventually leaked the fact that you handled the paperwork that could tie them to it. That is what you remember, the paper trail. As Damien spoke the name Havenwood Shelter, the details surrounding the location suddenly jarred loose a deep, painful memory in Kira's mind. Not a document but an incident. Wait, Kira whispered, her hands starting to shake. I do remember something strange a long time ago. It was right when I was leaving for the dental job. A woman came in late, well after intake hours. She was begging the head counselor not to put her name or location in the central file system. Kira's eyes closed, forcing the painful, suppressed image back into the present. She was terrified. She kept saying, "He knows everything, he's rich, he'll find me here. Don't let him know I'm asking for legal help." And the counselor told her, "We have to log everything, dear, it's procedure." The woman was desperate, crying. She was blonde, I think. Damien shook his head. Sophia had dark hair. No, wait, Kira insisted, her eyes flying open. The next morning the counselor was gone. And the woman was gone. And I remember seeing the file later, the one that mentioned the sophisticated stalker, and I specifically remember a photo attached to the file for quick ID. It was of a woman with dark hair, not blonde. I asked the new counselor about the discrepancy. What did the new counselor say? Damien demanded, his voice tight with anticipation. She said the initial intake photo was a mistake, that the initial intake form had been redone. They changed the photo, changed the file number, and the woman was moved out immediately to a secure, private location. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the secure ventilation. The puzzle pieces weren't just fitting, they were snapping together with cold, terrible force. Sophia had dark hair, Damien repeated, his voice low. The woman Kira saw was terrified of being found. The file was immediately altered, the initial intake counselor was suddenly gone, and a new photo was substituted. Damien looked at the ledger, then at Kira. The conspiracy was fully exposed. The leak. The original Havenwood counselor was the compromised insider, accepting money from the Vipers, via the donations, to leak crucial information including the details of Sophia's escape plan. The cover-up. When Sophia realized the leak and panicked, the counselor covered her tracks by altering Sophia's file and replacing the dark-haired Sophia's photo with a fake blonde ID, possibly to throw off any internal inquiry. The target. Kira had seen the original counselor, the initial terrified woman, and the file discrepancy, the very evidence of the cover-up. She hadn't seen the crime itself but the proof that the system was compromised. Ethan and the Vipers needed the original untainted records Kira had handled to expose the depth of the betrayal within their own ranks, and to ensure no one else could link their operation to Sophia's death. It all connects, Damien said, standing up, his frame rigid with vengeful resolve. Ethan was hunting you because he knew you saw the cover-up, Kira. Anne Marco's betrayal confirms the long-hidden conspiracy was deep. Someone in my world was tied to this decades ago. They weren't just chasing a memory. They were chasing the original evidence of a conspiracy that started with Sophia's murder. Kira was still trembling, the weight of the memory immense, but her terror had given way to a quiet, cold resolve. She finally understood why she was being hunted and who killed Sophia. The original intake records, Kira said, looking at Damien, her eyes steady. They must still exist somewhere. We need to find the real records from Havenwood. The immediate danger of the kidnapping was terrifying, but the clarity of the conspiracy was immensely empowering. The fight for justice was no longer vague. They had a target, a motive, and a weapon, the truth hidden in the past. Love and justice were winning because the darkness was finally exposed. A fortress can keep the enemy out, but it can't keep the truth from coming in. Kira needed to talk to her mother, Amara. After the revelation of the Black Ledger and the certainty that the original leak came from the Havenwood shelter, Kira knew there was one horrifying possibility she had to face. Could her mother know something? Amara had always worked multiple small jobs, sometimes dealing with people on the edge of the law to make ends meet. Damien had arranged for Amara to be brought to the mansion under tight security, ensuring the meeting was private but secured. Kira waited for her mother in a small, quiet drawing room, her heart aching with dread. Amara looked thin and terrified. She rushed straight to Kira, hugging her tightly, sobbing with relief that her daughter and Mia were safe. "Thank God, Kira. I've been so worried. The detective, Rourke, he said you were with a dangerous man." Kira held her mother back, her eyes hard, a painful mixture of love and accusation. "Mom, stop. We're safe because of Damien. But I need you to be honest with me, completely honest. This is life and death." Kira took a steadying breath, laying out the evidence simply. Her memory of the scared woman, the ledger transactions, and the link to Havenwood. "Mom, you worked at the shelter cleaning crew for a few months, right after I stopped volunteering. Did someone ever approach you about a woman named Sophia?" Amara's face crumpled instantly. The color drained from her cheeks and she didn't meet her daughter's eyes. The truth was written plainly in her sudden, crushing silence. "Oh God, Kira, I didn't know," Amara whispered, sinking onto the sofa. "I never knew what they would do. I swear to you." The confession was agonizing. Amara admitted that years ago she had fallen into debt after a medical crisis. A man who she now realized was working for the Vipers offered her fast, easy cash for discreet information. He asked for a single tip: the name and location of a woman named Sophia who was seeking legal counsel at the shelter. He said she was stealing from her husband, that they just wanted her back to settle the accounts. Amara choked out, clutching her hands in front of her. "I thought I was just helping a man get his property back. They gave me enough cash to pay the bills and I quit the cleaning job the next week. I never went back. I never spoke to him again." Kira stumbled backward, physically reeling from the devastation of the truth. The leak, the betrayal that cost Sophia her life and fueled Damien's grief, had come from her own mother. The terror that had upended her life was rooted in a single desperate 7-year-old financial mistake made by the woman she loved most. Damien, who had been listening from the adjoining room, felt the familiar crushing weight of betrayal descend again. Only this time it was deeper, more personal, and far more painful than Marco's treachery. It was history repeating itself with a cruel twist. The key to his fiancée's murder lay in the hands of the mother of the woman he was now desperately trying to protect. His failure to protect Sophia had been rooted in betrayal, and now his ability to protect Kira was compromised by the same terrible disease. He walked into the room, his eyes dark with a grief that had been ripped fresh open. "You gave them the information that led to her death," Damien stated, his voice quiet but carrying the full weight of a judge's verdict. "You signed her death warrant for a debt." Amara looked at him, terrified, but her voice gained a sudden, desperate strength. "I never signed anything, Mr. Moretti. I told you I stopped. I was horrified when I saw the news reports about that woman, Sophia. I never took another dime and I avoided that side of town for years. I knew I couldn't face what I'd done." She looked straight at Kira, pleading. "I am telling the truth. I only did it once years ago. I haven't been in contact with any of them. If they are after you now, it's not because of me. Someone is using my old mistake to frame you. Someone is making it look like I'm the continued leak." Amar pointed to Kira. "I filed the missing person report, Kira. I called the police. Why would I do that if I was still working for them? I've been terrified and hiding with your grandmother." This was the new sharp twist. Amara's desperation felt real. Her singular, past mistake explained the initial leak about Sophia, but her absolute denial of recent contact and her act of calling the police, alerting Detective Rourke and drawing unwanted official attention, didn't fit the profile of a current syndicate insider. Damien, though still devastated by the magnitude of the lie, seized on the logic. Amara's actions were frantic, panicked, and entirely focused on saving her daughter, not aiding the Vipers. If she stopped, and Marco was the internal leak here. Damien murmured, the pieces shifting in his mind. The conspiracy was more intricate than they thought. Someone was using Amara's past crime as a convenient cover story. Someone who had access to both the Viper's history and Damien's internal security information was now actively trying to ensure that Kira looked like the source of the problem. Kira looked at her mother, feeling the crushing weight of betrayal and the sudden, fierce love of forgiveness. "I believe you, Mom. I believe you didn't mean to hurt anyone." Amara's confession, though devastating, had given them crucial information. The true origin of Sophia's leak was not the initial betrayal, but the current deception. Damien watched the interaction, his grief momentarily sidelined by the need to act. He had lost his closest friend, and now he had lost his respect for Kira's mother. He felt a soul-deep exhaustion. But he looked at Kira, who was now stronger, having faced her family's painful truth, and he knew he couldn't stop. "If someone is framing you, Kira," Damien stated, his voice regaining its firm, commanding edge, "they are likely the mastermind behind the entire operation. We know they are clever, they are connected to both the Vipers and my inner circle, and they know your family's weaknesses." He reached out and gently guided Kira out of the room. The devastation was real, but the clarity was immediate. His heartbreak over history repeating itself was instantly channeled into a renewed, relentless commitment to protecting Kira from the final, cleverest traitor. They knew the original sin, now they had to find the ultimate sinner. Hope was painful, but it was forged in the heat of this terrible, necessary truth. The peace after the confession in the drawing room was brutally short-lived. Damien had just secured Kira and Mia in the reinforced panic room deep within the mansion's foundation when the first explosion hit. It wasn't a small flash, it was a devastating, earth-shaking roar that rattled the very concrete around them. The mastermind had clearly realized that with Marco exposed and the Black Ledger compromised, the time for subtlety was over. They had launched a full-scale military-grade assault on the fortress. "They're not trying to take you, they're trying to flatten the evidence," Damien stated, his voice tight over the din. He grabbed his gear, already moving with the practiced speed of a man who knows war. "We can't stay here. The defenses are breached." He led them through a series of cold, narrow service tunnels. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic smell of gunpowder. Above them, the sound of automatic gunfire erupted, punctuated by the shattering of glass. The great, silent house was now a chaotic battlefield. Kira didn't hesitate. She had faced her mother's betrayal and the terror of the previous night's attempt. Now her only focus was movement. She held Mia tightly, keeping the little girl's face pressed into her shoulder to muffle the terrifying noise. "Where are we going?" Kira shouted over a near miss. A burst of rounds hitting the concrete near the end of the tunnel. "The secondary underground garage," Damien yelled back, pulling a heavy steel hatch open. "There's an emergency vehicle prepped for this kind of scenario. Stay close." They spilled out into a dimly lit high-security parking area. Damien moved like a whirlwind, returning fire with lethal accuracy to cover their retreat toward a massive, matte black armored vehicle. Kira realized she was no longer just running, she was an essential part of the defense. When Damien's magazine ran dry, she had the presence of mind to throw him the replacement clip a guard had dropped, a silent, critical exchange that saved them precious seconds. The gunfire intensified. The enemy had found their escape route. Damien shoved Kira and Mia into the back seat of the powerful SUV. "Get down. Stay down," he commanded, slamming the door. He slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a deep, furious growl. The assault on the mansion roof was visible through the security cameras, a fiery, desperate attempt to end them. Damien slammed the vehicle into reverse, driving straight through a retractable security barrier. The powerful engine compensated, lurching them forward as they burst out of the garage and onto a secluded access road, the sounds of war rapidly fading behind them. They drove hard for 40 minutes before Damien finally pulled the massive vehicle into a covered, inconspicuous loading bay in an abandoned industrial area miles from the city. The silence here was overwhelming, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing and Mia's quiet whimpering. Kira was bruised, covered in dust and completely exhausted but alive. She looked at Damien, whose tactical gear was scorched in places, his face smeared with sweat and soot. He was a ruthless commander, yes, but he had just put his body between her and an army. "We lost everything," Kira whispered, the weight of the mansion's destruction finally hitting her. "No," Damien said, his voice husky. He reached back and touched Mia's hair gently, confirming she was okay. "We lost property. We kept the evidence. The ledger data is secured remotely. More importantly, we kept you. You are the only thing that matters. He paused, the adrenaline finally giving way to profound exhaustion and a raw, terrifying vulnerability. He looked at Kira, his eyes shadowed, no longer commanding but pleading. I'm terrified, Kira, he admitted, the words simple, honest, and entirely shattering the last remnants of the ice sculpture. Kira stared at him. She had seen him ruthless, brilliant, and betrayed, but never simply scared. I know I handled this badly from the start, he confessed, leaning his head back against the restraint. I was trying to be mechanical. I was trying to be safe. But watching that mansion burn, watching them come after you again, it brought me right back to Sophia. I couldn't breathe. I failed her because I was arrogant. If I lost you too, if I failed Mia. He looked at her, his usual mask of cold control entirely gone. I don't just want justice for Sophia anymore. I want you alive, Kira. I want Mia safe. You're not an asset or a responsibility. You are the only chance I have at making things right in this dark, messy world. I'm relying on you to stay safe just as much as you're relying on me to fight. He had opened up completely, laying his fear and his feelings bare in the shattered quiet of the armored car. Kira reached out, her hand finding his, not the tentative touch from before but a firm, intentional grasp. His hand was rough, strong, and entirely human. You won't fail, she said, her voice firm, fueled by the conviction born of surviving a war. Because we're together. I know the threat is my past and you know how to fight the future. We rely on each other. The exchange of vulnerability transformed their partnership. They were no longer the rescuer and the rescued. They were allies, bound by a terrible tragedy and a newly confessed terrifying love. The war had just started, but in the dark, quiet safety of the armored vehicle, they had won the first, most important battle. The battle against their own isolation and fear. They were broken but unified, and that unity was the fiercest hope they had left. After the terrifying escape from the burning mansion, Damien had one singular focus. He knew they couldn't move forward without understanding the mastermind behind the attack, and the only man who could unlock that door was Ethan Caldwell, Kira's ex. Using his remaining loyal contacts, Damien tracked Ethan to a dingy, forgotten motel on the city's outskirts. Ethan was hiding there, desperate and panicked, already abandoned by the Vipers now that his usefulness was over. The confrontation took place in a cold, small room. Damien stood by the door, a solid wall of controlled rage. Kira stood near him, her exhaustion replaced by a fierce, protective determination. Mia was safely secured miles away with a trusted security contact. Ethan looked nothing like the controlling man Kira remembered. He was pale, unshaven, and shaking. He was staring at his own imminent death, terrified not of the law, but of the monster he had allied himself with. You need to talk, Ethan, Damien said, his voice quiet, devoid of mercy. The mansion is gone. You almost killed my team. You brought a war to my door. Ethan laughed, a thin, pathetic sound. I didn't bring the war, Moretti. I was just the delivery boy. Kira stepped forward, her hands clenched. Why, Ethan? Why terrorize us? Why get involved with the Vipers? Ethan looked at her, his expression a defeated mixture of pity and resentment. It was never about you, Kira. Not really. And it wasn't even about Mia. He slumped back onto the cheap bed, finally broken. It was always about him, Ethan said, pointing a trembling finger at Damien. I was hired. Hired not just to scare you, but to make you look like you were running from a dark secret. The Vipers knew you'd call the police or your mother or anyone, and the message was intercepted. Damien's eyes narrowed dangerously. The wrong number. Exactly. Ethan cried, desperation fueling his voice. It was all engineered. They knew your history, Moretti. They knew you lost Sophia because you failed to see the small danger. They knew if I, a regular family man, looked like a dangerous threat to Kira, you'd step in. They knew you couldn't resist saving a woman walking Sophia's path. The revelation was chilling. Kira hadn't just accidentally contacted Damien, she had been a precisely chosen bait. The entire sequence, from the stalking to the wrong text, had been a masterfully orchestrated trap designed to force Damien's massive operation into the open so the Vipers could destroy him and take over his territory. Damien felt the cold realization that he had been played from the very start. His grief over Sophia had been weaponized against him. And Kira, Ethan continued, his eyes now glazed with fear, You were the bait that came with an explosive secret. The Vipers aren't just worried about the records you handled at Havenwood. You are the final piece. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You are the missing witness to Sophia's death, Kira. You never knew it, but you saw something that night. Something they need silenced forever. That's why they ramped up the violence. Kira's body went rigid. She saw a file. Her mother betrayed the name, but she had witnessed something? A missing witness. That was the ultimate secret hidden in her memory. What did I see? Kira demanded, her fear overridden by a desperate need for the truth. Tell me. What happened that night? Ethan scrambled off the bed, his voice hoarse with urgency. You were there. At the charity fundraiser. You saw. Bang. The sound was sharp, metallic, and terrifyingly close. It ripped through the thin wall of the motel room and struck Ethan Caldwell directly in the chest. Ethan gasped, his eyes wide with shocked disbelief and a final agonizing regret. He collapsed, the final crucial words dying in his throat, his outstretched hand twitching once before going still. Damien reacted instantly, shoving Kira behind a concrete support column before the echo of the shot could fully dissipate. His protective instincts were now paramount, overriding the chaos. Sniper, he yelled into his headset, his voice raw. They're covering the area. We have to move. He looked back at Ethan's body, the man silenced just seconds too late or too early. The Vipers had orchestrated the capture, and now they had silenced their pawn the moment he threatened to expose the final secret. The ruthlessness was staggering. Kira was shaking violently, looking at the pool of blood spreading quickly on the floor. She had faced her ex and found her answers, only to watch him brutally executed right in front of her. Damien grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back exit. We have what we need, Kira. We know the war is aimed at me. We know you are the missing witness. They don't know what you saw, and they don't know we know the motive. As they fled the scene, escaping into the chaotic safety of the city streets, Damien held her tight. The shock and terror were immense, but so was the terrifying clarity. Ethan's final confession, though cut short by the sniper's bullet, was their ultimate weapon. The Vipers had used Kira as bait to draw out Damien, but they had fatally underestimated the unbreakable strength of the bond they forged in the process. Damien's jaw was set. He had nearly lost Kira, and now he knew exactly why. He was no longer just protecting her. He was dismantling a conspiracy built on his own grief. The danger was higher than ever, but so was their determination. The terrifying truth had come at a heavy cost, but it had left them united and focused on their final enemy. Hope, fierce and urgent, was all they had left. After Ethan's shocking sniper-cut confession, Damien knew exactly who the mastermind was. The puzzle pieces, the sudden knowledge of his private life, the aggressive, timely advice to abandon him, the ability to manipulate police reports, all pointed to one man, Detective Thomas Rourke. Damien, with Kira by his side, tracked Rourke to an abandoned city evidence warehouse. A place of forgotten justice, perfect for a traitor. They found Rourke waiting, standing by a table covered with binders, looking relaxed, almost pleased. He wasn't wearing his police uniform. He was in simple, expensive black clothing, the true uniform of a man who dealt in shadows. Took you long enough, Moretti, Rourke said, a cold, predatory smile splitting his face. I was beginning to think you'd die in the fire like a rat. Kira gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You were behind the ambush? Rourke laughed, a genuine chilling sound of arrogance. Of course. Did you really think some third-rate syndicate could take down Damien Moretti's primary fortress? I provided the schematics, the attack timing, and the information that you had moved your operations room to the core of the house after the first botched attempt. Marco was a useful idiot for the security codes, but I was the brains. He looked at Kira, his eyes cold and assessing. And you, Miss Davis. You were the bait. You were never randomly targeted. The wrong number wasn't a mistake? Kira whispered, the horrifying realization twisting her stomach. Hardly, Rourke confirmed, enjoying the shock. Ethan Caldwell was a desperate addict, a perfect actor. He was hired to start the stalking and create the escape scenario. He was paid to let you send that terrified text message, which my contact at the telecom company ensured was rerouted directly to one of Moretti's burner phones, the one conveniently labeled Painter. The entire chain of events, Kira's initial panic, her mother's past mistake, Ethan's confession, had been a brilliantly constructed illusion, all orchestrated by the man who wore a badge. Rourke spread his hands, basking in his triumph. The plan was simple. The Vipers needed a way to destroy Moretti without starting an open war. They knew his one weakness was Sophia, and his inability to resist saving a woman in her shoes. We used your terror to lure him out, expose his operation, and then kill him, making it look like a rival hit gone wrong. Kira felt the true terror of the situation. She wasn't an escapee, she was a manufactured lure, the single piece of bait that could pull the entire Moretti empire into the firing line. But why me? Kira pleaded, her voice breaking. Why go through all this trouble? Why didn't you just kill me quietly? Rourke's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of cold, final ruthlessness. Because Miss Davis, you didn't just handle Sophia's file at Havenwood. You saw the one detail that can destroy everything we've built over the last decade. You are the missing witness because you saw the original intake photograph. The one of the woman who really provided the information to Sophia's stalker. He slammed his hand down on the table, pointing to a single faded picture he had retrieved from the abandoned evidence. It was the same photo Kira had seen at the shelter years ago, the fake blonde woman used in the altered file. The blonde woman was the wife of a powerful senator who was also compromised by the Vipers. She was the one who initially tried to run and asked for Sophia's help, but when she got scared and turned back, she betrayed Sophia to the Vipers to save her own husband, Rourke revealed. You saw the true identity of the woman who caused Sophia's death, a woman tied to the highest level of government who Rourke and the Vipers have been protecting for years. You remember the true face of the first betrayer, Rourke finished. That memory, once solidified, is enough to unravel the entire syndicate and expose the high-level corruption I've spent years covering up. That's why you had to bring Moretti here, and that's why you have to die now. As Rourke reached for a silenced weapon hidden beneath the binders, the massive steel warehouse door behind him burst open with a deafening crash. Damien Moretti stood there, a vision of rage and absolute commitment, his eyes focused entirely on Kira. His security team fanned out instantly, filling the room with the hard silence of imminent conflict. He had followed his lead to the bitter end. Rourke. Damien's voice was a low snarl, the sound of a man who had nothing left to lose but the woman he loved. Rourke reacted with the cool speed of a cornered professional. He grabbed Kira, pulling her backward, pressing the cold, hard muzzle of the silenced weapon against her temple. Don't move, Moretti. Rourke barked, retreating slowly behind a stack of crates. Call your men off or I put a bullet in her head right here. Kira felt the cold barrel and the immediate terror, but she looked at Damien. In his eyes she saw not just the protective commander, but the man who was terrified of losing his love again. Damien, no. Kira choked out, knowing Rourke would use his hesitation. Damien didn't falter. He stood his ground, a picture of frozen, desperate control. Let her go, Thomas, Damien commanded, using Rourke's first name, the simple demand laced with finality. This was always about me. Don't let it end with her. Rourke smirked, enjoying the moment of ultimate leverage. It ends with both of you, Moretti. But she goes first. The truth was fully exposed. The mastermind was a detective, the bait was a lie, and the final piece of evidence was locked inside Kira's memory. Damien had arrived just in time to witness the final awful act of betrayal, but he was too late to prevent his love from becoming the hostage in the war for justice. The final, desperate fight had begun. The silence in the abandoned warehouse was heavy with the weight of the drawn weapon. Rourke held Kira tight, the cold muzzle pressed against her temple, his face twisted in a victorious sneer. Damien stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest, the final brutal lesson of Sophia's death playing out before him. But he wouldn't fail again. Drop your weapons, Moretti. Now. Rourke shrieked. Damien's men hesitated, but Damien didn't. He slowly raised his hands in surrender, deliberately drawing Rourke's attention. Rourke, arrogant and focused on the threat in front of him, didn't notice the subtle shift in the shadows. That's right, Rourke sneered. On your knees, mobster. Damien took one step forward, dropping to one knee, not in surrender but positioning himself for the shot. In the precise moment Rourke registered the betrayal in the movement, Damien's loyal second-in-command, a man trained for this exact scenario, fired a low-velocity, non-lethal round that struck Rourke's gun hand. The shot was instant, designed only to disarm. The weapon clattered away. Kira instantly seized the opportunity, shoving Rourke backward with all her strength. Rourke stumbled, roaring in pain and rage. He regained his balance, lunging toward Kira, intent on finishing the job with his bare hands. But Damien was already moving. He didn't use a clean shot. He drove forward with a feral intensity born of years of suppressed grief and the raw, terrifying fear of watching history repeat itself. He tackled Rourke, slamming the traitor detective against a steel column. There was a quick, brutal struggle, a silent explosion of violence. Damien, fueled by vengeance and love, was unstoppable. He overpowered Rourke easily, and with a cold, final calculation, ended the life of the man who had murdered his fiancée and terrorized the woman he loved. The silence that followed was absolute, punctuated only by Damien's ragged breathing. Kira stood motionless, watching Rourke's body drop to the concrete. The nightmare was over. She was safe. In the aftermath, as Damien's men moved in to secure the scene, Kira walked over to Damien. He was covered in sweat and grime, his body shaking with the spent adrenaline, his control finally fractured. She didn't look at the body of the man who had just tried to kill her. She looked only at Damien, the hero who had killed for her. She was safe, but the trauma of the escape, the confession, and Rourke's face, the face of the final mastermind, was too much. She slumped against a wall, her head falling back. And then it happened. The final, forgotten detail Ethan had died trying to reveal. As the image of Rourke's triumphant, arrogant face faded, it was instantly replaced in her mind's eye by the memory of the blonde woman at Havenwood, the woman who had betrayed Sophia, and standing right beside her years ago giving her comfort was a second, larger man. A man in a simple suit. Kira hadn't seen a crime, she had seen the conspirators together. She had seen Rourke, the policeman, standing with the woman who betrayed Sophia, the senator's wife, and a third man, the man who was clearly giving them orders. The blonde woman. "I saw her with him," Kira whispered, her eyes wide with shocking clarity. "The man who talked to her. Not Rourke. The other one. He was the leader. He gave her money and touched her arm like he owned her." She looked straight at Damien and the name came to her with brutal force. "I know his face. He's not just the Viper boss. He's Victor Thorne." Victor Thorne, the Viper leader, was a powerful, untouchable figure in the city's underground, known for controlling high-level corruption and avoiding direct exposure. But Kira's testimony, confirming she saw him actively paying and controlling the senator's wife, the woman Rourke was protecting, right at the shelter years ago, was the missing witness evidence Rourke had feared. Damien acted swiftly, combining the evidence from the Black Ledger, Rourke's final confession, and Kira's definitive visual identification. The net closed quickly and decisively. Within days, Victor Thorne was implicated in Sophia's murder, the money laundering at Havenwood, and the elaborate plot to assassinate Damien. The war was over. Justice was served not by a badge, but by the combined force of a mob boss's ruthlessness and a mother's painful memory. The aftermath was quiet. Amara was cleared of any charges. Kira's testimony proved her only involvement was a single long-ago tip, and that Rourke and Thorne had used that single mistake to frame Kira in the present. Amara was safe, finally free from the shadow of the syndicate. Months later, Kira and Damien stood on the balcony of their new, smaller, infinitely more secure home. A place built on the promise of a future, not the memory of a siege. Mia was safe, happy and thriving. "Rourke said I should trust the law, not you," Kira said softly, leaning her head against Damien's shoulder. "He said you were just using me as an asset." Damien wrapped his arm around her, holding her tightly. "He was wrong. I thought I was saving you to settle an old debt. I thought I was protecting an asset." Kira turned, looking up at him, her eyes clear and resolute. "And I am choosing to stay not because you saved me from a detective or a mob boss, but because you saved me from my own fear and from a truth that would have destroyed me." She ran her hand over his cheek, her gaze steady. "You faced the ghosts of your past for me, and in doing so you saved your soul from the betrayal. I faced the terror of my own family's mistake and my hidden memories, and I saved you from your ultimate enemy, Victor Thorne." She smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile of acceptance. "We are here together not because you were my strong protector, but because we both saved each other." The war was over. The redemption was complete. They had found love not in clean origins, but in the trenches of a shared, necessary fight. Their future was built on trust, truth, and the absolute certainty that in the darkest corners of life, they were each other's redemption. And just like that, the story ends not with certainty but with a heartbeat, one that promises their fight isn't over. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If this story touched you, broke you a little, or kept you on the edge, let me know down in the comments what city you're watching from. I truly love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Your support means everything. Now, let's continue this journey together.